Hello, everyone, and we do really apologize for this delay. It has been a tough technical issue to solve. Here you are, live from Frankfurt, starting our Frankfurt Book Fair KnowTalks edition 2022, live from the MBRF booth. So thank you for taking the time to connect today and to learn more about this very timely topic, which is economic diplomacy in a fragmented world in time of uncertainty as well. So again, we're live from the NDRF booth at the Frankfurt Book Fair. We'll be hosting till the 23rd of October a series of talks around topics such as poverty, urban development, economic diplomacy, creative knowledge management, bioinformatics, and among others. So these talks are brought to you by the United Nations Development Program and the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation. So our audience, this session will be fully in English. However, Arabic and French interpretation are available. All you have to do is just click on the globe at the bottom of the screen, choose French or Arabic, and make sure to mute original audio. So let's start with our session with our guest, Abdo Medlej. Hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello, Anthony.
Hi. So our very first session today will tap on, a very timely topic in light of the pressing global issues and conflicts. And mainly the serious headwinds that are most likely pushing the global economy towards a recession or a depression, which would require countries and regions to coordinate, collaborate, and work closely to solve this issue. Abdo Medlej, you're the economic attaché at the Lebanese embassy to the federal to Germany. Without further ado, let's start with the session with a guiding question. How could economic diplomacy, the art of possible, be a strong instrument to bridge the gaps and prevent additional conflict and disparities? Over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. I would like to first thank the UNDP, the whole team, and I would like to thank Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation for hosting this session. And in this super inspiring environment, actually, and it shows that the foundation believes in the importance of knowledge in spreading not just information and knowledge, but also peace. So your question, to go back to your question, it's a big question. In order to explain what does economic diplomacy, how can economic diplomacy be efficient in a fragmented world? That's your question. I would like to start first by defining a little bit what is economic diplomacy. So let's start by giving a definition. There is no single definition to economic diplomacy. This is why we say that we have definitions of economic diplomacy. The most plain one is the one that says that economic diplomacy is the decision-making in core issues affecting international economic relations. So that's very plain, very basic definition, but it takes us to a set of questions. First, what are these core issues, and who are the actors that influence or that work in the economic diplomacy? So the main issues are, of course, for a country, the objective is economic growth. It's improving economic affairs, economic environment, economic relationship. So it's about, for diplomacy, it's about international treaties, trade, investment agreements, all these subjects that are related to economic affairs and at the international level. Who are the actors? The actors, like intuitively, you would say the actors are the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the whole diplomatic corps. That's true, but that's not the only actor. The actors now are not just state, you have non-state actors also. And these are taking more and more importance. So that's the definition. It takes us to maybe we can say on the first slide if people are following the presentation. That's if you want, the basic definition. But then the question is, what's the objective of economic diplomacy? What's the point from a national perspective, you can have different objectives. Signing treaties, trade agreement, international investment trade agreement, improving export. All this can be put in three main subjects. It's facilitating access to foreign market for national companies. It's improving or encouraging the export for local companies. The second one is attracting foreign direct investment inside the country. All this should be done by influencing, if you want, the international rules, by influencing as much as possible, because some countries can influence more than the others, influencing the regulations and standards. So this is, if you want, the definition of economic diplomacy. So the second question is, okay, we define the economic diplomacy. How did the economic diplomacy evolve? What's the evolution of economic diplomacy? It's a big story, but if we start talking about the evolution of economic diplomacy from the Second World War. So economic diplomacy took a larger importance within the diplomacy in general after the Second World War, and this is due to the fact that we have the Marshall Plan in Europe. So it was clear that you have the economy is taking bigger importance in the diplomatic affairs. Then you have set of events that show that really we need economic diplomacy when we talk about diplomacy in general and international economic affairs. You have the rise of the emerging countries. You have the globalization, the free trade, some events that are like new to us. You have the Brexit. So all these events made economic diplomacy more and more, gave it more and more importance. And also we have to note something, that diplomacy in general had to rethink its objective and the way it works, and like how it adds value to diplomacy in general, because with the rise of transfer of information, with the exchange of information, you don't wait for a diplomat to send a report to have some information about the host country. It's more of influencing. So the dimension where the diplomat sends information, this is obsolete with the huge transfer of information and the communication, the ease of communication nowadays. So this is economic diplomacy. This is the rise of economic diplomacy. You mentioned the fragmentation of the world. So what is a fragmented world? That's very important to start by defining it. So a fragmented world is it's a global situation where no single state is likely to dominate the whole international scene. This is the situation now. We thought that after the fall of the Wall of Berlin, 1990, that there will be the world will be dominated by one major power. We spoke about the end of history, but then events showed us that that's not true. You don't have one single state that is dominating the international scene. Why is that? If you want to look at what are the sources of power, so as a state, you need, in order to dominate, you have sources of power. What are the sources of power? These sources of power will tell you if one single country can dominate, yes or no. So these sources of power changed with time. Basically, it used to be military power, economic power. You would add human talent. Of course, that's known, but that's not enough anymore. You have the network power. How much a country can have a network inside each state and with other states, with set of countries, with regions, so it can influence these regions. You have the information power, as you mentioned earlier. And the most important change is the technological power. I mean, it's clear if you look now at the China-US struggle, large part of it is related to technology. Who will dominate the technological advancement? Who will dominate all these technologies that are kind of ruling the world? So since the sources of power are diversified, it's clear that no single country can dominate all these sources of power, which led to this situation where you have fragmentation of power. You have fragmentation of power. What's the impact of this on the world? The main impact is that it's creating instability. Risk of conflicts are very high, and this is what we're noticing nowadays, because again, you have states that are playing this power game, but it's not just state. You have non-state actors. Non-state actors are taking a larger role nowadays if you want, in setting the scene of this fragmentation of the world. So that's the situation. Fragmented world, no single country can have domination on all these sources of power, which leads to instability and risk of conflicts. So that's, if you want, the fragmentation of the world. What's next is that, okay, the world is fragmented. How is this impacting diplomacy? The first thing, you have these different players that have different, that have sources of power and that are active in the international scene. So this shows that you have diffusion of power. This diffusion of power is exacerbated with the technology. Technology is playing a major role. Technology is playing a major role in giving power to these actors. And since it is diffused, then you have different actors that are influential in the political scene. So you have this diffusion of power, and which means the diplomacy should act within this world in a more complex environment. More complex because you have more actors, you have much more stakeholders, you have much more issues to deal with. So these are the two influence on diplomatic scene in general, and of course on the economic affairs. So we saw the fragmentation, the impact of fragmentation on diplomacy in general and on economic affairs. Next idea is, so how should economic diplomacy act and behave differently now that we have seen this fragmentation, which takes us to like the main issue. That's the main issue. We can talk about several changes that the economic diplomacy should go through. So we can talk about different issues, but we can summarize them in three things. First, if you look at the international world order, if you want, it's what sets the ground for this international order. It's all these standards, the policies, the international treatment, treaties. These treaties being investment, commercial, human rights. So all these treaties should be thought of differently now with this fragmentation, to take into consideration the existence of much more players than before. So this is where economic diplomacy should act and should focus. How we renegotiate all this, how we change international treaties, how do we add dimensions that were not taken into consideration, technological norms, technological standards. This is a big fight. I mean, 5G was clearly a big technological, political, diplomatical fight in the world. Who leads this, who takes the lead, would take like some source of power and would have more influence on information, on the world, on politics. So all this needs some standards. Economic diplomacy should play a major role in this, in renegotiating, redefining, and rethinking all these international treaties. The second idea is not just about economic diplomacy, but it's mainly about economic diplomacy. It's transparency. You know, like, of course, each country should pursue its own interests. So if I decide to invest as a country, or if I decide to have a trade facility with one other country, of course, it's economic, but also it's political. So there is all, and that's fine with this. I mean, states have their own interests. There's nothing unacceptable about this, but it's about transparency. For example, if a country decides to invest in the infrastructure of another country, of course, there is some strategic interest. That's fine. But then we have seen this in several international cases where a country is investing in infrastructure, but the objective is not just investment. It's more influencing, taking even ownership sometimes to this other infrastructure asset. We have seen this, and this was criticized. This was we saw this as an example of lack of transparency in the international economic affairs. Another thing also that economic diplomacy should take into consideration is the wider cooperation. At the international level, we have seen that you have a lot of actors, a lot of sources of power, a lot of countries strong in one more than the other. But so, and you have at the same time some international or global actors. I would say like IMF, World Bank, all the investment development banks. So I think they have a big role to play into, if you want, having more peaceful environment. This takes us to the idea that, of course, you have globalization, of course, you have some technological advancement, you have economic advancement for some countries, but at the same time, you have countries that are really left behind. And this creates instability. This creates like risk of conflict. This is where economic diplomacy should act to stabilize, to make things more peaceful, to allow these regions, these states to develop also. And this is where some international development banks can provide financing to ensure there is stability in these countries. So these are mainly the three points where fragmentation impacted economic diplomacy and imposed, if you want, a new set of rules on economic diplomacy. So that's it. Like on more global note, this fragmentation, of course, led to instability, led to discrepancies in development, in social situation, if you want, of some countries. So a lot of actors also should be careful and should be responsible in the way they act. At the corporate level, we have seen corporates taking, you know, like a highly responsible stand towards big issues such as energy transition, decarbonization of heavy industries. But at the corporate level, there should be more innovation and commitment into these subjects. This worldwide also, the social contract should be, I don't want to say revised because there is no written like international social contract, but it should be thought of differently. And this, everyone should participate in this. A social contract that is more just, that provides more justice, more equity, to remove these discrepancies in development that are really increasing due to this fragmentation, and in general increase on constructive public policy. We saw that you have corporates that are very powerful, you have nations that are very powerful. They should work together in order to have more constructive public policy with transparency, as I mentioned earlier. So that's, if you want, very briefly, the economic diplomacy in general, and how it is changed, being like modified by the fragmentation of the world.
Perfect. Thank you, Abdo, for this very informative presentation. That would maybe now we can kick off with some questions to follow up on this presentation, and maybe we would also encourage our audience to drop their questions in the Q&A section. So my first question, you have stated in your presentation, non-state actors. Who are they, and how can they interfere in the diplomatic sphere, given that they are non-state actors?
Non-state actors are becoming actually very influential. It's so who are they? Non-state actors are, intuitively, you would say corporates, but that's not just corporates. It's corporates plus all the business associations, of course, but you have other super influential non-state actors. One of them is the NGOs, actually. And the NGOs have played very often very positive role. They can influence actually the debate. They can influence relationship between states, between regions. So corporates, definitely, they have sometimes more power than state. Imagine Intel was investing in Latin American country, and they used to they exited later on, but they were more than 5% of the GDP of this country. So you can imagine the influence that they can have on setting policies inside this country, and how they can negotiate. They are not state actors, but they will negotiate with governments on setting the tax agenda, on setting the labor law agenda, on setting the relationship also. Because if you want, let's say, if you want a European country, European corporate to invest in strategic business in another country, then it means that you will need the approval of the local authority, which means this corporate will influence the relationship of its country of origin with this country where it wants to invest. So they have tremendous role. They can influence relationship between countries. They will negotiate with other countries, but they can also set the agenda inside their own country. The NGOs, and I think the NGOs played a great role in a lot of issues, such as child labor, for example, abuse of labor in general. They were really, I mean, they forced countries and corporates to change their policies, their laws, or at least to respect their existing laws, because very often you have laws in place, but you don't respect them. So in issues such as child labor, and now with all the environment issues, they are playing great role. They negotiate, they impact, they change the relationship between countries also. And a negative non-state actor, I would say, terrorist organizations, everything that is international. And we have seen terrorist organizations becoming much more international nowadays. I mean, September 11 is a great example of how a terrorist organization can influence the course of history, not in one single country. So these are non-state actors, and this is how much influence they can have.
Perfect. Then building what you have mentioned now, that mainly businesses or corporates and NGOs, they do play a significant role in redefining the economic diplomacy of a country. Just building on this point, how could private-public partnership play a role in advancing the economic diplomacy agenda? And is it encouraged?
Actually, public-private partnership sets the legal framework of relationship between a corporate and a government. So this legal framework, usually it is used for big investment, for big projects. And definitely it influences the relationship, and it has an impact on economic and diplomatic affairs between countries. Because imagine you have a big infrastructure project in a country, and then what you want to invite international companies to invest in this big infrastructure project. So that under the form of PPP. So again, we go back to non-state actor that is highly needed and highly influencing the relationship between countries and between corporate and countries. So if you want PPP to be successful, and you want to be able to invite any kind of corporate from east to west, we need to be in a good relationship with countries and with corporates from east to west. So PPP is another example of how you need more, how you say, interconnected world that leads to more positive relationship to influence the economic welfare of the country.
Great. Then besides the role that corporates and the private sector would play in economic diplomacy, maybe it's also important to move from the local context to a more regional context. Like with developing maybe a regional economic integration and defining our connectivity, which is now a main obstacle for several regions around the world. Like how could countries sharing common not only territories but national resources or human capital would work together?
Well, they have to actually. They have to work together, and they better find a peaceful way of working together. So and as I said earlier, economic diplomacy and diplomacy in general should rethink all the international treaties. And these countries, they are forced to find a way to solve if there is any political problem, let's say territorial problem, they are forced for economic reasons, they are forced to solve these problems. And we see this all the time. Whenever there's a conflict, very often it's economic justification that leads to some kind of peace or like cease of this conflict. So they have to think that if they don't cooperate, if they don't interact in a peaceful and constructive, by building constructive relationship, this will impact the internal situation, and then they will have to face with social unrest internally if they are always in a situation of conflict with their neighbors. So it's like on the long run, they have to find a peaceful solution, and this is where economic diplomacy and diplomacy in general can play a very important role.
So maybe just to summarize some of the points that you've mentioned, like there's the interest of the country, which with the country negotiating or being involved in this economic diplomacy exercise, and then there are several bottlenecks and discrepancies between the interests. So we have been receiving several questions from the audience. Please make sure to drop them in the Q&A section so we can relay them with our very dear guest today. So One of the questions relates to globalization. Like you've mentioned that globalization has made economic diplomacy more common and has positioned it as a very critical and crucial instrument. But don't you think that globalization would lead to more fragmentation, and then more fragmentation would lead to more economic diplomacy, and this is a vicious cycle that would never end?
That's true, actually. Actually, globalization created fragmentation, and this, like, there's a dialectical relationship between these two concepts. One cannot live without the other, and the more you have globalization, the more we will see fragmentation. Why is this? Because globalization created a sense of or some countries, some politicians, or some political parties use this also to say that globalization is how you say, clearing your own identity. You go to identity politics. So they use this as a mean of fear for their voters, and to tell them that globalization is not good for you, is not good for your region, is not good for our country. We need to be more independent. Globalization is making us less independent. So they are using this, and this is leading to more fragmentation. On this, actually, it's interesting to look at social media, because social media increases the fragmentation. And it's for technological reasons. Actually, social media, if you go on social media and you express your opinion, the more your opinion is extreme, the more the analytics of social media of the platform will show you these extreme ideas of you, but said by other users. So if you're on social media, you express extreme ideas, you will see only extreme ideas. And this will give you the impression that, yeah, I'm right, actually. Everyone thinks like this. But it's not everyone. It's the social media platform that is deliberately pushing toward you extreme ideas like yours. So this ends up by like big separation between extreme ideas, more fragmentation, instead of showing you more like different ideas. You have your extreme ideas, but you have more peaceful ideas, or ideas in the middle, different ideas. So it doesn't push you to think and to have some critical opinion on your ideas. It gives you the impression that, yeah, your ideas are great, you are right, so go more into extreme. So social media is also adding to this fragmentation. So globalization leads to fragmentation, but I think at the end, globalization would be the winner, because we have seen this several times. We have seen, if you look at the beginning of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, you have a lot of countries that started protecting their medical materials, things that we never thought would happen inside the group of countries. So the first reaction was fragmentation. I want to protect my own population. But then they discovered that it's impossible. You cannot protect your own population if you don't interact, if you don't play the globalization game with the others. So fragmentation is probably it comes from globalization, but globalization, I think and I hope, is the winner.
Perfect. So we've highlighted a lot on the economic and financial returns of economic diplomacy and so on. So what is the importance, what could be the importance and the returns of economic diplomacy, speaking about the cultural, scientific, and other technical cooperation? Like, why would they need to also cooperate in other areas than economic, and financial sectors?
Actually, it's part of the economic diplomacy is also aid, actually, global aid, international development. Very often countries put this under the economic diplomacy umbrella, because economic diplomacy should think also about these, not just, if you want, profit issues, knowledge. I mean, your foundation is clearly influencing also, the international relationship, and it's about knowledge. So economic diplomacy is not just about profit, and it has to look at other sides of human relationship, also for economic and for profit, I would say, profit reasons, because the more you have population open to each other's, listening to the different cultural changes or different cultural things in the other country, the more they can trade, and they can have better economic affairs. So economic diplomacy is also about all these human factors. First, because it's important, and also because it impacts the economic and business environment.
Perfect. Then maybe it would be also important to have received a question in the chat box, like 2 questions around poverty, climate change, and other problems. How could economic diplomacy address global problems like climate change that would affect all countries, not necessarily equally, and global poverty?
Well, this it takes us back to what's the driver behind economic diplomacy. The driver is if we agree on the fact that in this fragmented world you have more risk, more uncertainty, and economic diplomacy should address these issues, then what you just mentioned, these inequalities, climate change, all these issues are leading to more inequality and to conflictual situations. So economic diplomacy should address these issues if the aim is better economic affairs and more, if you want, stable and more peaceful situation. It's very important to note something, that again, globalization is a great tool for I don't know, for seeing this economic improvement all around the world, but also it created inequalities, and you cannot have a stable society if you have a lot of inequalities. This is where diplomacy should work. They should try to provide support to countries in need, not just because these countries, not just for economic reasons, but also to reach stability in the relationship between these countries.
Perfect. You have another question from the audience regarding the interlinkages between a knowledge economy and economic diplomacy. The knowledge economy is based on close coordination, knowledge creation, dissemination, and localization. So I recall you have tapped on the free flow of information and data before and its importance to economic diplomacy. But how could economies in their knowledge economy journey work on economic diplomacy? Does it have to be a lot about maybe diversification? Because there's also another question here about the importance of diversification and complementarity.
So yeah, actually so can you just repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, so we have a question about the connection and the interlinkage between the concept of a knowledge economy and economic diplomacy. Is economic diplomacy at the heart of knowledge economy? If not, how should this be integrated in the knowledge economy?
Yeah, definitely. Economic diplomacy deals with, as I said, should deal more and more with all the norms and standards that constitute the international order. And part of these norms and standards are knowledge. It's also the access to knowledge, access to information. And economic diplomacy should make sure that everyone has access as much as possible. Everyone has access to knowledge, to information, to education, to health. And how do you do this? You do this by improving international treaties. You do this by negotiating, by having agreements between countries and between corporates and countries. So yeah, this is where economic diplomacy can play an important role.
All right, you have another question. I think somehow now the questions will be unrelated and not in a sequence, because as they come, we are picking up the questions from the audience and relay them. We have a good number. I think we're going to take 2 more questions and then conclude this session with some final remarks. So back to the role of NGOs as non-state actors, we have seen the prominence of NGOs to fill the gaps of the government. Do you think like NGOs and the government should be aligned when it comes to economic diplomacy and the principles of economic diplomacy of the country? And especially that sometimes NGOs are not from the country of origin, you know?
By definition, these international NGOs don't have one single country of origin. You know, you have now, it's estimated to have around 200 influential NGOs in the world. The NGOs, by the mindset of an NGO is very often the government is not doing its role. I want to do the role of the government, and that's not possible. An NGO can never replace the government, because you need to work with someone. You need to implement rules, regulations. You need to enforce existing rules. So an NGO should understand that they cannot replace the government. They have to work with the government, and the government also should understand that they have to listen to the NGOs, because they are influential. They can influence public opinion, sometimes much more than governments. So you cannot implement your ideas without the government. That's for the NGO. But the government also cannot avoid listening to the NGO, because they will influence their own public opinion. They have to work together. It's not possible other than this.
Great. I think by that we do agree, Abdo. I'm not sure if you agree with me. What we could conclude from this session is cooperation, collaboration towards new innovative approaches in doing policy making and international cooperation. So what are your final remarks? What do you think would be some guiding principles for economies, not only by the government, but also the non-state actors, in driving forward a more inclusive future?
Well, for everyone, actually. As we said, like all the actors in the diplomatic scene nowadays should follow these principles of more cooperation, more cooperation, more openness. You know, like you cannot accept. You will not see. If you take it at the state level, you will not see a peaceful situation within the state and within the world if you don't have some form of equality. You cannot accept to see the discrepancies, inequality at different levels, economic inequality, access to information, access to health. This should be the main objective of all the actors. How to reach, how to reduce inequalities. I think that's not just the job of governments, but also of corporates and of NGOs. And this is possible only by creating an inclusive environment, inclusive economy, inclusive administration, inclusive political environment. So that's, I think, the key word. And this makes me think about, there's a very interesting book, actually, Why Nations Fail. And if you want to summarize it, actually, they say that, the book says that a nation would fail if they don't create inclusive institutions, political institutions, economic institutions. So I think that's key. You have to include everyone in this development process. Otherwise, you will see much more fragmentation, much more risk of war and conflict.
Now that you know that economic diplomacy serves as a great starting point, which is not a new concept, but we need maybe to reconsider it in designing our policies. It's the only way out, maybe. So by that, thank you so much, Abdo, for this session, and apologies again for the delay in starting this session. It has been a very informative session. I hope the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. And stay tuned for our next session that will start in around less than 45 minutes on future-proofing workforces through transformative learning with Janina Berler from Siemens. See you and stay tuned. Bye.
Thank you.